policy where it really demonstrates, I think, a few things. Like the people's lack of knowledge of economics, I think, is on full display with this policy. So as far as free market prescriptions go, obviously there's ones that are super, controversial, clearly. Like obviously Zulu and I will advocate for things like, ending the Federal Reserve and abolishing all taxation and whatnot. And those are obviously, to put it lightly, very, very controversial positions to take. There's a very tiny sliver of the broader economic, world that would adopt that position. But there are some free market policies that are pretty well established at being, I suppose, like fairly commonplace. Like even people that are considered, left wing within the kind of economic establishment will still be like, yeah, like the free market position makes sense on that. And rent control is one of those positions. Like if you look up, censuses on economists and like their position on rent control, it's something in the realm of 90 to 95% of economists will agree. If you ask them, does rent control hurt like the general welfare of people within an economy? 19 out of 20, if not more, economists that you survey are going to be like, yeah, that's a bad policy. It's a very rare occurrence to find someone who's actually studied economics and does it for a living, whether they are Austrian, Chicago, Keynesian, post-Keynesian, new Keynesian, fucking MMT, like you name it. They're probably going to say that rent control is bad simply because it's such an obvious example of a price ceiling that leads to a shortage. So I don't know if you wanted to touch on that at all, Zulu, like kind of how we're seeing people's ignorance of economics kind of be on full display when it comes to popular support of rent control.
Yeah, it basically just kills off New York City, right? Nobody's going to want to invest in New York, given inflation, by the way, if there's a rent cap, because most people are renting, they're not buying, or they're going to buy and then try and rent it off, right? So if you pair this with inflation especially, you've basically got this ever-reducing price ceiling. So I know if I'm going to build some super expensive apartment complex in New York, the amount of value that that's going to be able to get by housing people keeps going down and down and down over time. And, who knows if they're going to introduce like, oh, now we're reducing the price ceiling even further. Who knows if that's going to happen? It's just really a terrible, terrible way of trying to keep prices down. The way the market would bring prices down is, oh my God, housing is super expensive over here. I can make a bunch of money. I'm going to build my own apartment complex and try and undercut people a little bit. That's how the market would deal with this. If you just put price controls in place, well, then you're bound to get shortages, right? If you just bring it down manually, in effect, well, that doesn't change the economic reality of how much it costs to build in New York. So people just aren't going to build then. This doesn't solve the fundamental problem. It's in effect, you're just going in there and ignoring the fundamentals of the situation and saying, well, ignore all that. I wish that housing were cheap. I am the government. I wish housing were cheap. So let it be done. It's that, but wishes don't actually change anything.
Right. And to your point on investment, I mean, New York, given the size of the population, given the development there, is a pretty tough city to envisage killing off. But I think Zoran is going to take a pretty good crack at it with policies like this. Like if there's anyone that can kill off New York as like the hub of, Western capitalism or whatever you want to call it, or like as at least in some parts of it, obviously it has some pretty bad underbelly to it, at the very least the upside to it. Like killing that off is no mean feat, but I think Zoran might be able to achieve it. But to your point on the whole investment thing, look, it's not just the prices themselves or the specific policy that's being implemented. It's also about creating uncertainty for investors. So to give you a comparison, so there's been conversations in Australia around, increasing basically the prices of gas has risen, and Australia is a big exporter of natural gas. And a lot of politicians are like, well, all this gas is being extracted from quote unquote our natural resources and then exported overseas for money. we as the Australian public deserve some of that money, and so they're advocating for like gas export taxes. So if you export, whatever amount of natural gas from Australia to overseas, you're going to pay a certain amount of tax back to the Australian government, in order to give the Australian public their quote unquote fair share of that slice. And obviously, this is just a bad policy, but for multiple reasons. But one of them that I think doesn't get touched on enough is like if you as a government show the willingness to just ad hoc introduce these policies with no real forethought and just on a whim, more or less, because like, oh, gas prices have gone up here, let's tax them more so that we can collect more revenue off of that. Well, you're creating an unstable and unattractive market for private investors to come in and build, because the whole point of me building, like, again, whether it's an apartment complex in New York or a gas extraction facility in Australia, the whole point is that I hope that the prices of those things are going to go up so that I can collect money when I make a smart investment. But now you're telling me that even if I do everything right and I correctly predict that the prices are going to be high here and I can collect higher profits, that you're going to punish me for that. So I'm just not going to invest in the first place. So this is how these things snowball. And it's one of those seen versus the unseen things going on here. I think that's something that people just don't recognize, is that think about all the apartment complexes that won't be built because of this policy, and think of all of the gas extraction facilities and jobs that would have created that won't be built because of Australia introducing a natural gas export tax. So I think that's something that libertarians need to talk about more when it comes to these policies, is get a real understanding of it all comes down to incentives, and recognize that it's not about just arbitrarily saying, oh, well, if we abolished rent control, then landlords would be nice and reduce their rents. Like that's not what's going on here. There's actually clear incentives at play, and I don't know if you want to touch on any of that at all, Zulu.
Yeah, it's with these types of policies, I think it's always helpful to take the reductio version of that policy. Like, it's okay, I wish housing were cheaper. That's the current wish in place. At least forward looking, it's going to be, I wish it was cheaper than it currently is, because now they're just freezing it at the price it is, so it's going to keep rising. So let's say they instead say, I wish rent were free. I wish rent were free across all of New York City. And would that be an even better policy in these people's minds? Can they see no problems with making rent free? It's the same with the minimum wage. Like, why limit yourself? If this is a rising tide that lifts up all ships with it, as the metaphor sometimes goes, why not set the minimum wage to be $1 billion an hour? And then we'll all be billionaires, right? That'll create so much wealth. Or set it to be equal to the maximum amount of wealth that can possibly be extracted from the observable universe. Set that to be the minimum wage. What would be the problem there? Well, clearly nobody can actually fucking pay that. So you're just not going to get any jobs done. Or immediately every single company goes bankrupt. And nobody gets hired to do anything. And we're back to the fucking Stone Age. Same with this rent thing. I wish all rents were free. Well, basically what you've done there is allowed people to seize every investor who's ever built property in New York. You just allowed them to seize that property. Which is, sometimes people actually advocate stuff like that, like with the squatters' rights type things. And, like, really, then you can very clearly see, like, no, nobody is going to build anything more there. So all you've done is, in effect, killed off the host. You've collected the crop. You've harvested the crop. That's the right word. You've harvested the crop. You've slaughtered the golden goose. Sure, you might get whatever golden eggs are in its stomach at the moment, but there's no more coming. Okay, no more is going to come from that. If you really want to solve, because obviously rents are outrageously expensive in New York, if you really want to solve that problem, you've got to YIMBY max. You got to say, okay, let's get rid of all these fucking retarded legislations and stuff, and allow people to start building, and then rents can start falling. I mean, you've seen this to some extent in places like Austin, where people are allowed to build to a much greater extent, and the rents keep falling year after year. That's how you solve problems with rent, is you stop restricting the supply, because the state wants to have it both ways. They want to restrict the supply of housing with all these insane legislations. And also, they want to, in effect, force people with this restricted supply to sell it as if there weren't the restricted supply. That's just I wish economics, and that's the entire policy of Zoran Mamdani. People are like, "Oh, look, he's so friendly, he's so nice." It's like, but he's just doing I wish economics. Like, sure, anybody can get up there and say, "I wish everything you want was could be provided for fucking free," and now wouldn't that be great? It's like, okay, well, does your wish have any fucking actual bearing on reality? No, it doesn't. So just implementing these wishes by state fiat, you just end up getting more and more problems. And it's so obvious to anybody who has like a modicum of common sense. You don't even have to be like an economist to understand this. Like, just think it through. The one extra step beyond that. You don't even have to think of like fifth order consequences. Just think of the second order consequences. This type of thing. Just think it through yourself as like a thought experiment, even.
Yes. I think the big problem. So when you obviously the initial point you brought up was, imagine saying like the reductio case for rent control being, well, what if you just made the rent $0? Like, would that be a good policy? Like, the unfortunate thing is that a lot of people will actually say yes. They actually unironically think that rent should just be $0. Like, it should just be completely free to rent an apartment. Like, it shouldn't cost any money. And that goes to what we're talking about, just the level of like misunderstanding of what's going on and the lack of ability to actually think through the implications of a policy whereby you are obligated to provide housing for free. Like, just in terms of, they'll say something like, it shouldn't cost anything to, rent an apartment. It's like, well, I'm sorry, but it always costs something to rent an apartment. It's just who is paying that cost. And in your scenario, what you're demanding is that workers build, or someone builds this apartment completely for free without, reaping any of the benefits. Otherwise, this final consumer isn't going to be able to collect this apartment for free. They're going to have to pay for it. So what they're actually advocating for is the enslavement of, whether it's a worker or a landlord or whoever else, to build a home for them. That's what they're actually advocating for. And that's something that we need to, again, emphasize to people is, you aren't advocating for like a nice thing to be done for renters. What you're advocating for is for a horrible thing to be done to the people who build the houses that you get to live in the first place. And I think that's something that's really important for people to be, confronted with, is that's actually your policy, is coerced labor or coerced extraction of property that was justly acquired. That's what you're advocating for, and I think people need to, I suppose, be forced to recognise that. The other point, and I want you to come back in on this, is kind of how it exposes the problems with I suppose democracy and I suppose the people's tendency towards high time preference solutions. I know I talked about this in an X post, but I kind of wanted to throw to you on this one. Like, do you think that we're kind of seeing Hopper's argument in full force with this kind of argument that's been coming out?
Yeah, because I did see that post, and I think the guy like deleted his original tweet about it. He was saying something to effect of like, well, I mean, it's the meritocratic free market of ideas, guys. This is how democracy is done. This is why democracy is so great. No, this has nothing to do with merit. This has everything to do with I wish economics. If you say I wish everybody would have, free this, free that. I wish everybody would have $1 billion. Then the voters are like, yeah, definitely, I wish that too. So I'm going to vote for you because you've got the same wish as me, feller. Now the problem is that none of them think about the fact that, well, scarcity is actually still a thing. You can't just say, I wish, I wish, I wish, and then make it so. There is no wizard with a magic wand there. The magic whatever you want into existence. There still are scarce means. So all you're going to achieve is a reallocation of scarce means, right? And you're not going to like how the means are reallocated unless you just love poverty, I guess. If you love poverty, then Zoran Mamdani is the best politician for you. If you in fact hate poverty, I hate poverty. I would think most people would hate poverty. If you hate poverty, then definitely no. Zoran Mamdani is a bad shot. I wish economics is not going to stop people from being poor. You can't just say, I wish poverty was not a thing any longer. It's still going to be a thing. The question is, how is that poverty going to be distributed? And the more wishes you make, the more widely poverty gets distributed. It's because you're impoverishing, as you're saying. It's the people who is getting punished by this. It is the people who do the building. Okay, so if you go and impoverish them, well, then there is no longer any production going on in that sector. That's what it means to impoverish somebody. So you're impoverishing the very production that is required to lift people out of poverty. It is the most asinine possible solution you could have, and it is born entirely from this 3-year-old's understanding of economics. And the average person simply will never understand this. This is why democracy is the god that failed. It's a terrible, terrible system. Because if you just give enough wishes, then sure, in the very immediate short run, it might feel very good for people, and then there'll be inevitable problems. And then it's like, well, we just need more wishes to get ourselves out of this. It's the exact same thing with what causes the business cycle, according to Austrians. Right? What causes the business cycle? It is the introduction of fiduciary media. Why do they do that in the first place? Well, it does cause booms. It does indeed cause a whole bunch of investment, and it causes a whole bunch of numbers to go up. But those numbers going up are all malinvestments. Pardon me. I was watching this video by Drew Gooden the other day, where he kept saying like how everything is terrible these days. How technology isn't fun anymore, I believe the video is called. And he completely fails to identify the fundamental cause of all of this. It's not because of capitalism. It's because of malinvestment, clustered malinvestments. This is the whole problem with this number go up thing, which people correctly point out, that a lot of the current economy is entirely fake, and it's just based on number go up. Why is it based on number go up? Well, what causes those numbers to go up is malinvestment. It is the introduction of fiduciary media by state central banking. That is what causes number go up systems, and that's only a bad thing when that number going up doesn't actually correspond to an increase in wealth. When it doesn't correspond to an increase in wealth is exactly when you have fiat money, fake money. That's what fiat means. It's let it be so. That's what fiat means. It's I wish money, right? If you have an I wish economy, then your economy is no longer connected to the actual real world conditions. And then when people find this out, then you get an inevitable bust. And you don't fix the bust by just taking more magic mushrooms, hallucinating again, and just pretending as if you've got more saved up. Because that's what an increase in, a reduction in the interest rate would mean on the market. It would mean that more has been saved up than otherwise, so you can invest in longer run projects, right? So if you just futz with the interest rate, then you've just effectively made every investor hallucinate that more has been saved than has actually been saved, that there are more resources, that resources are more abundant than they actually are. You've just made a wish that resources were more abundant, but that doesn't actually make them more abundant. All you've done is create this inevitable bust when people realize that they shouldn't have been investing in those things. There's this great analogy that I like to use, where basically if you imagine Robinson Crusoe on the island, and he's got these magic mushrooms, right? And they make him hallucinate in a very specific way. They make him hallucinate that he's got way more resources saved than he actually does have saved. This is the exact effect that is caused in the minds of investors when there's introduction of fiat money, right? So what does Robinson Crusoe do? Well, he tries and he starts, instead of fixing his leaky roof in his shack, he tries to build a mansion, right? Instead of building like a tiny little raft they can start fishing off of, he builds an entire fishing trawler. He starts doing all these crazy things, right? And then when the mushrooms wear off, he enters a bust phase. He does enter a bust phase where he realizes, oh shit, I shouldn't have been investing in any of those things. I have way less resources saved than I thought I did. The solution to that isn't take more magic mushrooms. The solution is start investing in the correct things. And this will be hard in the meantime. It will be hard because you're actually investing based on reality now, and you've made all these bad investments. But the solution to that isn't to make more bad investments. That's just going to exacerbate the problem even further.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, obviously, totally agree with all that. I posted something in the Jumbotron because this picks up on something else I wanted to talk a little bit about. And it's this whole notion. So there's a lot of leftists who their entire kind of argumentation strategy is to just deny anything good that actually does come of capitalism could ever come from, markets or anything of that nature. Like they'll just be like, oh, it's like foolish to believe that, markets could produce good outcomes despite the fact that they actually believe in a magical entity like the government just being able to magically produce stuff for them. Like that's their belief system, but obviously it's our belief system that independent people coordinating and actually engaging in what's in their own rational self-interest. That is completely unbelievable. That would never happen. But the government just magically knowing what to do, that could happen. But yeah, so this tweet, it says, living, breathing human beings sincerely believe and build their entire economic understanding and opinions based off things that and behaviors that have genuinely never existed in the history of American capitalism. It's in response to someone doing a little, political compass ball or whatever it is that says, the government just cut taxes, so I lowered, and the lowered thing obviously being rent prices, while keeping it profitable. And they think that this is something that's never happened in history, despite like the overwhelming preponderance of evidence that shows that there is such a thing as taxes being passed on to consumers, and the obvious corollary of that being that a tax cut would also be passed on to consumers. And it's worth remembering first and foremost that these were the same